The tests that are used in language programs are often adopted from sources outside of the program. This may mean that the tests are bought from commercial publishing houses, adopted from other language programs, or pulled straight from the current textbook. It is probable that many of the tests which have been acquired from external sources are being used with students quite different from those envisioned when the tests were originally developed and standardized. Using tests with the wrong types of students can result in mismatches between the test and the abilities of the students, as well as between the test and the purposes of the program. For instance, there are situations where a proficiency test like the TOEFL is used for making placement decisions in a program with narrowly defined ability levels. The decisions are being based on test questions that are to a large extent too easy or too difficult for the students involved. Thus, the test items are quite unrelated to the needs of the particular students in the given language program or unrelated to the curriculum being taught in that program. This lesson is divided into two main parts. First, test reviews are introduced as a tool to help teachers find a suitable test. Second, how to evaluate a published test and examine its appropriacy in your own teaching and testing context. Selecting good tests to match the purposes of a particular language program is therefore very important. However, making these matches properly is often difficult because of the technical aspects of testing that many language teachers find intimidating. In searching for tests that are suitable for a program, teachers and administrators may therefore wish to begin by looking for help from testing experts by reading test reviews. You can find test reviews in the review sections of language teaching journals, along with reviews of textbooks and professional volumes. Naturally, testing is not the focus of these journals, so test reviews tend to appear infrequently. Language Testing is a journal that specializes in articles on testing and therefore is more likely to provide test reviews. These particular reviews are sometimes fairly technical because the intended audience is testing specialists. For English teachers, though somewhat dated now, there is a book that provides a collection of practical and useful test reviews specifically designed for them. Most of the major tests available for ESL at that time are reviewed. One other source for language test reviews is available. It is commonly referred to as Bureau's Mental Measurements Yearbook, a book of review of all kinds of published tests, including language tests, that comes out every 2 or 3 years. Other approaches that teachers might want to use to improve their abilities to select quality tests for their programs would include informing themselves about language testing through taking a course or reading up on it. In all cases, the checklist provided in Table 2.4 should help in selecting tests that match the purposes for which a particular language program needs them. In using the checklist, teachers should look at the test manual provided by the publisher and begin by considering the general facts about the test. What is the title? Who wrote it? Where and when was it published? As shown in the table, the theoretical orientation of the test should probably be reviewed next. Is it in the correct family of tests, NRT or CRT, for the program's purposes? Is it designed for the type of decisions involved? Does it match the methodological orientation of the teachers and the goals of the curriculum? What types of subtests are involved? Are they discrete points or integrative, or some combination of the two? From a practical point of view, a number of other issues must be considered. For instance, to what degree is the test objective? Will allowances have to be made for subjectivity? What about cost? Is the test too expensive for the program or just about right? What about logistics? Is the test going to be easy to put together, administer, and score? In terms of test characteristics, the nature of the test questions must be considered. What are the students confronted with in the receptive mode? And what are they expected to do in the productive mode? If the test is designed for norm reference decisions, is information about norms and standardized scores provided? Does the test seem to be aimed at the correct group of students and organized to test the skills that are taught in the program? How many parts and separate scores will there be, and are they all necessary? Do the types of test questions reflect the productive and receptive types of techniques and exercises that are used in the program? Is the test described clearly, and does the description make sense? Is the test reliable and valid? There are other practical considerations that are also important. What are the initial and ongoing costs of the test? How good is the quality of the audio program, test booklets, answer sheets, and so forth? Are there preview booklets or other sorts of preparatory materials available to give out to the students? Is the test easy to administer? Is the scoring reasonably easy relative to the types of test questions being used? Is the interpretation of scores explained with guidelines for reporting and clarifying the scores to the students and teachers involved?
Hello again. Today we are talking about assessment and curriculum design. And today I'm drawing very much on my background as someone who researches and teaches in the field of language curriculum design. Here is the cover of a book which I co-authored with my colleague Professor Paul Nation, also at Victoria University of Wellington. And it's one of two books that we've done together about curriculum design. So it seemed appropriate to think about testing and assessment within the whole process of designing a curriculum. So today you're going to do two things. You will, first of all, understand about the importance of thinking about assessment before you start teaching. And secondly, you're going to learn a bit more about diagnostic assessment. So diagnostic assessment was one of the 6 forms of assessment that we looked at in another talk. But let me begin with a bit of a story. I remember when I first began teaching. And one of the things you got given as you became a teacher when you joined the school was a grade book. So this was a book in which you recorded the names of your students and the grades they got as the year or the term went on. And I can remember more than once having the feeling towards the end of the term and looking at the grade book and knowing I had to write reports and give grades to my students, of looking in my grade book and thinking, oh no, I've got no grades recorded, which resulted in me giving students a flurry of little tests right towards the end of the term or the semester so that I had some grades on which to base a report or a final grade. Now let me say this is dreadful practice, absolutely dreadful practice, because what I was doing essentially was this. I was testing for no obvious reason. It really wasn't even short-term achievement testing, which is something we've talked about in another film. It really was testing for no obvious reason. And this is something we should ban from our classrooms. We should never test for no obvious reason. So there are 2 points I want to take away from this little story. The first point is that we need to think about assessment before we start teaching. We need to know what we're going to assess and when. And the second point I want to make is, as part of that, is that we need to space our assessments so we have a reasonable amount of assessment. One thing I observe in my work when I evaluate teaching programs is often huge amounts of what I think are over-assessment. In one program I reviewed fairly recently, in some of the courses there were up to 19 assessment points. But it seems a lot to me, and especially when the assessment is happening in class. So suddenly the teaching and learning time is being taken up by lots and lots and lots of assessment activity. So we need to think in advance about when we're going to assess and how we're going to assess and what the purpose is. So let's turn to diagnostic assessment. What is diagnostic assessment? Diagnostic assessment is what teachers do to find out what learners already know or do not know, what they can and cannot do. And it's very, very important to have this information. So how do we go about getting it? Well, I'm going to give 2 scenarios. One is that you can do some diagnostic assessment before teaching starts. And this is a good idea. It gives you some sense of who your learners are. So how can you do it? Well, you can go to different sources. You might, for example, look at curriculum documents to find out what the learners should already have covered and perhaps what they should be covering this year or this term with you as the teacher. Related to that is if you have access to them, you can look at the results the students got in their last class or last course or last year. This gives you some idea of where they are at. And if it's possible, good idea to chat with the person who taught the students before. Now, this obviously is easier in a system where students are moving from class to class to class, as opposed to coming into a new situation from many different settings. But if possible, it is another good source of information that provides some basis for diagnostic assessment before teaching starts. But of course, most of the diagnostic assessment will happen once you've met the students, once teaching starts. And there are a number of things, again, that you can do here. Some might be analysis of students' language use. This could take the form of observation of learning, a topic of another talk, or more rigorous and detailed analysis of language use. Similarly, you might get learners to self-assess, to say what they think they're good at, what they think they're not so good at, what they would like in the course. And the last one I'm going to mention is perhaps the most obvious one, and that is testing of some sort. An example of a very useful diagnostic test is this one, the vocab levels test. This gives you information about the vocab level of your students. Do they know the 2,000 most frequent words, or don't they? If they do know them, do they know the academic word list, or don't they? So knowing your students' vocab levels can help you to diagnose what their language needs are and what they need to do to improve. And this, of course, is the point of diagnostic assessment. It helps you to help your learners to improve. When I'm talking in curriculum design terms, I'm often talking about this as a form of needs analysis. So I'm going to leave you with an image, an analogy that I think is very appropriate to this subject. And that's the idea of a GPS. Many of you will have them in your cars, I suspect, if you were lucky enough to own a car. Why is it like a GPS? Well, a GPS is something that gets you from A to B. It tells you where you are now, where you want to go, and how to get there. So when you're doing diagnostic assessment or needs analysis, that's what you are doing for your learners. You're finding out where they are now, you're finding out where they need to be, and you, as the expert, as the teacher, are using your skills and your knowledge to plan a teaching program that will get your learners from point A to point B. And that is a really worthwhile thing to do. Thank you.
In short, there are many factors that must be considered even in adopting an already published test for a particular program. Many of these issues can be addressed by any thoughtful language teacher, but others, such as examining the degree to which the test is reliable and valid, will take more knowledge and experience with language tests.